There is something deeply unsettling about silence because sometimes silence is not truly empty at all. Sometimes it is a person sitting awake late at night, overwhelmed by a realization they can no longer avoid. A realization that arrives far too late for comfort. Imagine this for a moment. Someone once had your presence, your trust, your warmth, your understanding, and they treated it as though it would always remain within reach. They assumed your energy would continue existing around them, no matter how carelessly they behaved. But now, the absence of what they lost has become louder than any words they once ignored. Somewhere deep within their mind, something has started shifting. Because the human soul carries a dangerous tendency. It rarely understands true value until loss forces awareness into consciousness. People can deceive others. They can even deceive themselves. They can bury emotions beneath pride, distractions, temporary pleasures, and endless noise. But the unconscious mind remembers everything connected to emotional meaning. Every sincere connection, every emotional wound, every moment they should have appreciated more carefully. And when a person finally realizes they destroyed something genuine, the mind slowly begins turning against its own illusions. Sleep changes, thoughts change, emotions change. Even silence itself changes because deep inside, they already know they made a mistake. Silence is one of the strangest forms of confession. Most people assume regret always arrives through words, explanations, or dramatic apologies, but the deepest realizations rarely appear in such obvious ways. Human beings often reveal the truth of their emotions indirectly, especially when guilt begins rising from the unconscious mind. A person who knows they made a mistake may never openly admit it at first, yet their silence slowly begins revealing everything they are attempting to hide. This happens because the human psyche struggles to remain peaceful after damaging something meaningful. Even when the conscious mind attempts to justify the past, the deeper layers of personality continue carrying the emotional weight of what happened. At first, silence can appear cold. It may look like indifference, avoidance, or emotional distance. But there are moments when silence transforms into something entirely different. It becomes heavy. A person starts thinking more than speaking. They replay conversations privately inside their mind. They remember details they once ignored without effort. The absence of the other person begins creating psychological pressure inside them. This pressure becomes extremely difficult to escape because meaningful emotional bonds do not simply disappear because someone walks away from them. The unconscious remembers emotional truth long after the ego pretends to move forward. Many people feel uncomfortable confronting the reality that they caused pain. The ego naturally protects itself from shame because shame threatens the image people created about who they believe they are. Someone may desperately want to believe they were right, justified, or emotionally unaffected. Yet silence slowly exposes the conflict unfolding inside them. Their behavior begins changing. Their energy begins changing. Sometimes they become strangely reflective. Sometimes they begin observing from a distance instead of communicating directly. Sometimes they withdraw from distractions because the inner world has become louder than external noise. This is how regret often begins, not with confession, but with emotional disturbance. There is also a reason silence becomes stronger after loss. When a meaningful person is no longer emotionally available, the mind loses its distractions and begins confronting absence itself. Absence carries a psychological force capable of revealing hidden emotions. What was once taken for granted suddenly becomes emotionally valuable. Small memories gain enormous importance. The mind repeatedly returns to unfinished moments because unresolved emotional experiences naturally seek completion. A person who once ignored your presence may suddenly feel surrounded by reminders of you. Not because life is punishing them, but because the unconscious mind connects meaning to emotional memory. This is why some people begin changing long before they ever speak honestly. Their silence starts carrying emotional tension. They may hesitate before contacting you. They may repeatedly appear and disappear. They may struggle to explain themselves clearly because part of them is trapped between pride and emotional truth. The deeper the connection was, the harder it becomes for them to escape the realization of what they lost. Silence then becomes more revealing than language itself. Words can easily be manipulated. People can lie through speech. They can perform confidence while hiding emotional chaos underneath the surface. But silence often exposes what language tries desperately to control. A person haunted by regret cannot fully silence the unconscious mind forever. Eventually, emotional truth begins surfacing through behavior, attention, memories, and emotional reactions they themselves may not completely understand. What they refuse to say directly begins expressing itself indirectly because the human soul naturally moves toward truth even when the ego resists it. The unconscious mind is far more powerful than most people realize. A person may convince themselves they have moved on, forgotten someone, or escaped the emotional consequences of their actions. Yet, deep beneath conscious awareness, the psyche continues carrying everything connected to emotional meaning. The unconscious does not function like ordinary memory. It does not simply store information as facts. It stores emotional experiences as living psychological energy. This is why certain people remain unforgettable long after communication ends. This is why unresolved emotions continue resurfacing through thoughts, dreams, behaviors, and emotional reactions that seem impossible to fully control. Many individuals believe forgetting is a choice. They assume that if they distract themselves enough, stay busy enough, or avoid emotional reflection long enough, the past will disappear naturally. But the unconscious mind does not operate according to denial. What is emotionally significant becomes embedded within the deepest layers of personality. The more meaningful the connection was, the stronger its imprint becomes. Even if the conscious mind temporarily stops thinking about someone, the unconscious continues carrying their emotional presence silently in the background. This is why people unexpectedly become emotional during strange moments. A song, a place, a familiar voice, or even an ordinary silence can suddenly awaken memories that seemed buried forever. The conscious mind becomes confused because it believes the situation already ended, but emotionally, the psyche never completely released it. The unconscious constantly seeks wholeness and emotional resolution. Anything unfinished continues existing internally as tension, and eventually, that tension demands attention. When someone makes a mistake in a meaningful relationship, the unconscious stores not only the memory of the person, but also the emotional truth connected to the loss. The conscious ego may create excuses to avoid guilt. It may blame timing, circumstances, misunderstandings, or emotional confusion. Yet the unconscious knows when something valuable was damaged. This creates an inner conflict between the image a person wants to believe about themselves and the deeper truth they cannot fully escape. Over time, this conflict begins affecting behavior, emotions, and even identity itself. A person may try appearing normal on the outside while internally carrying emotional chaos they cannot explain. They may smile publicly while privately feeling haunted by thoughts they cannot silence. This is because emotional truth does not disappear simply because someone avoids it. The psyche always attempts to restore balance. And when someone loses a meaningful connection through their own actions, the mind eventually forces them to confront what they tried to ignore. Many people misunderstand regret. They imagine regret as a temporary emotion that fades quickly with time. But genuine regret is much deeper than sadness. It is the painful recognition that someone had something real in their hands and failed to protect it. That realization changes people internally. It forces them to see themselves differently. Sometimes they begin questioning their own decisions, their emotional patterns, even the way they treated love itself. The silence they carry becomes heavier because part of them understands they cannot undo the past. They cannot return to the exact moment where everything shifted. And that awareness creates emotional pressure that slowly grows stronger over time. Some people become restless after losing someone meaningful. They search for distractions, attention, validation, or temporary excitement because they are trying to escape themselves. Yet no distraction fully silences emotional truth forever. Eventually, the mind becomes exhausted from running. Eventually, silence returns. And when it does, the memories waiting underneath begin resurfacing again. The person remembers how you made them feel. They remember conversations they once overlooked. They remember moments of comfort, warmth, understanding, and emotional safety they failed to appreciate while it was still present. This is why absence can become psychologically powerful. Sometimes people only recognize emotional security after they no longer have access to it. The deeper the emotional connection was, the more impossible it becomes to erase completely. Human beings are emotionally shaped by meaningful experiences. Genuine emotional bonds leave psychological imprints that remain long after separation occurs. This is why some people suddenly return emotionally after long periods of silence. It is not always because they plan to. Sometimes the unconscious simply refuses to let the emotional truth disappear. The memories continue surfacing. The emotional tension continues growing, and eventually the silence itself becomes unbearable. A person carrying regret often struggles internally between ego and vulnerability. One part of them wants to protect pride. Another part desperately wants emotional relief. This creates inconsistency in behavior. They may distance themselves one moment and seek closeness the next. They may appear emotionally detached while secretly thinking about you constantly. The human mind becomes complicated when emotional truth conflicts with pride. But no matter how much someone avoids honesty, the unconscious continues speaking through emotions, reactions, memories, dreams, and silence itself. Because deep inside, the soul always recognizes what truly mattered. People often assume regret appears immediately, but deep psychological regret usually develops in silence and over time. In the beginning, pride shields the ego from emotional pain. A person distracts themselves, searches for outside validation, or convinces themselves they made the right decision. They attempt to move forward quickly, believing that avoidance will protect them from emotional discomfort. But once enough silence and distance create emotional space, the unconscious mind begins speaking more loudly than before. The mind starts revisiting memories again and again. Certain moments suddenly gain emotional intensity. The individual begins noticing details they once overlooked or dismissed completely. What once seemed ordinary or insignificant now carries emotional meaning because the unconscious is slowly revealing the hidden value of the connection. The human psyche has a strange way of exposing truth only after something meaningful is no longer easily available. Dreams also become deeply important during this process. The unconscious frequently communicates through symbols, emotions, fragments of memory, and recurring images. A person may begin dreaming about someone they claim no longer matters to them. This happens because dreams bypass the ego and reveal emotional truths buried beneath conscious control. The unconscious does not care about pride, appearances, or emotional performance. It reveals what still exists inside the psyche, regardless of what the conscious mind tries to deny. There is also a psychological reason why some people cannot completely replace one specific person even after meeting many others. The unconscious forms emotional associations based on emotional depth rather than convenience or surface attraction. Genuine emotional bonds affect the structure of the inner world itself. Certain connections awaken hidden parts of the personality that ordinary relationships never reach. Once this happens, the psyche remembers the experience with unusual emotional intensity. The unconscious rarely forgets emotional truth because meaningful experiences become part of personal transformation itself. Even when people try escaping their emotions, those feelings continue shaping reactions, fears, choices, and desires beneath awareness. What remains unresolved internally continues influencing life quietly, patiently, and persistently through the hidden language of the soul. Many people believe they have moved on simply because they stopped speaking about someone, yet silence does not always mean emotional freedom. Often, the deepest emotions are the ones buried furthest beneath awareness. Human beings rarely recognize the true value of something while it is constantly present in their lives. The mind easily becomes familiar with attention, affection, emotional support, consistency, and care. What becomes familiar often turns psychologically invisible. People assume certain connections will always remain available, so they stop recognizing their true emotional depth. This is one of the quiet tragedies of human nature. Individuals often fail to appreciate what nourishes them emotionally until its absence creates emptiness they can no longer ignore. Many people only awaken to the importance of another person after absence removes the emotional comfort they once took for granted. Loss becomes the force that reveals meaning. When someone walks away, emotionally or physically disappears from a person's life, the mind enters a completely different psychological state. The routines that once distracted the individual begin collapsing. Conversations that once seemed ordinary suddenly become memories filled with emotional weight and significance. The silence left behind creates space for reflection. Reflection then exposes truths the ego previously ignored. This is why loss has the power to create awareness. It interrupts illusion and forces the psyche to confront reality without distraction. At first, many people resist this realization completely. The ego does not want to admit it failed to appreciate something meaningful. Pride attempts protecting the individual from emotional pain by minimizing the loss. A person may repeatedly tell themselves they are fine, that the connection was not truly special, or that they can easily replace what disappeared. They may throw themselves into work, distractions, new relationships, or temporary pleasures in order to avoid confronting the emotional truth underneath. But emotional truth cannot stay buried forever. Once absence becomes emotionally real, the unconscious begins revealing what the conscious mind refused to understand earlier. This process usually unfolds slowly. A person may suddenly notice how empty certain experiences feel without the other individual present. Familiar routines lose emotional warmth. New conversations begin feeling superficial or emotionally hollow. Even personal achievements may start feeling strangely incomplete because the emotional connection that once gave life meaning is no longer there. Success loses some of its emotional satisfaction when there is no one meaningful left to share it with internally. This realization becomes especially powerful when someone recognizes that the person they lost offered emotional understanding, safety, acceptance, or authenticity that is difficult to find elsewhere. Loss also changes perception itself. Small moments that once appeared insignificant suddenly become emotionally valuable inside memory. A simple conversation, a brief glance, shared laughter, a quiet silence, or a moment of emotional support begins replaying repeatedly inside the mind. The unconscious starts gathering emotional evidence proving the connection mattered far more than the ego originally admitted. What was once ignored slowly becomes unforgettable. This is why some individuals become haunted by memories long after separation occurs. The psyche is attempting to process the emotional truth of what was lost. The mind revisits these moments because unresolved emotional experiences seek understanding and integration. There is also a deeper psychological reason why absence creates awareness. Human beings often define value through emotional contrast. People understand warmth more deeply after experiencing coldness. They understand connection more deeply after loneliness. In the same way, loss reveals emotional importance because the mind finally experiences life without the presence that once balanced it internally. The emotional gap becomes impossible to ignore no matter how hard the ego tries to escape it. Sometimes, this realization changes a person completely. Someone who once behaved carelessly begins becoming more reflective and emotionally aware. They start questioning their decisions, actions, emotional immaturity, and unconscious behavior patterns. The pain of losing something meaningful forces psychological growth because suffering possesses a unique ability to awaken self-awareness. A person may begin recognizing patterns within themselves they never noticed before. Fear of vulnerability, emotional avoidance, pride, self-sabotage. The inability to appreciate genuine connection while it existed. The painful truth is that awareness often arrives too late. By the time someone fully understands the value of what they lost, the connection may already be damaged beyond repair. Yet, even then, the realization continues transforming them internally. Loss becomes a psychological mirror, exposing hidden aspects of the personality. It reveals emotional blindness, suppressed feelings, unresolved fears, and unconscious wounds. The absence of one deeply meaningful person can completely alter the way someone understands love, relationships, intimacy, and themselves, because the human soul often learns its deepest truths only through emptiness and emotional deprivation. When a person realizes they made a mistake, the transformation rarely begins through words. It begins internally, deep within the emotional structure of the psyche itself. Before someone openly admits regret, their behavior often begins shifting in subtle, unconscious, and emotionally inconsistent ways. This happens because inner conflict creates psychological tension, and the human mind struggles to remain emotionally stable when two opposing truths exist at the same time. On one side, the ego wants to protect pride, maintain emotional control, and avoid shame or vulnerability. On the other side, the deeper self recognizes that something meaningful was damaged, neglected, or lost. This silent internal battle changes behavior long before confession ever arrives. A person experiencing inner conflict often becomes emotionally unpredictable. One moment, they appear distant and emotionally detached. The next moment, they seem unusually nostalgic, curious, reactive, or emotionally affected by small reminders connected to the person they lost. They may begin checking old messages, revisiting memories, listening to songs connected to the relationship, or thinking about moments they once ignored. Sometimes they attempt reaching out indirectly, searching for excuses to reconnect without fully exposing their vulnerability. Other times they withdraw further because the emotional tension inside them feels overwhelming. The unconscious mind constantly moves between denial and recognition, creating instability within their emotional state.